would like first to thank you for listening to me. My contribution will be very modest, but coming from Switzerland, a country where people are law-abiding, and having been instructed that I should not exceed 15 minutes, I will do my best. I would like also to thank Father Gifko, Dr. Jean-Claude Larcher for suggesting that I should be invited, and Nikos Gouraros for inviting me. My experience as a blogger started with a strange challenge. While surfing the internet looking for Orthodox websites, I came across an ad pretending that one could create a blog in 10 minutes. Not being a computer scientist and not being gifted in the field of information technology, I always thought that a computer was a kind of typewriter. I decided to see whether the ad was true, and indeed, in less than 10 minutes, I created my first blog. A quarter of an hour later, I had posted my first article and sent the address of my newly created blog to some of my friends. The first article I posted was taken from a confidential publication of mine. In those days, I used to translate or write texts for a little review for the monastery of Archimandrite Placide de Sade in France. The friends of his monastery would help his community financially, and in return, they would get a modest publication that consisted mainly in translation of Orthodox spiritual texts that were new in the French language. This was published 4 times a year and had all in all about 50 readers. The blog created on the basis of this text now has an average of 1,800 to 2,000 readers per week. In those days, in 2007, there were very few Orthodox blogs in the French language, and there certainly was a need for more. Most of them were just parish blogs that gave addresses of churches, schedules of Orthodox services, and very rarely spiritual food for their readers. Little by little, I used all the material I had translated or written for the monastery of Archimandrite Placide's publication over the past 50 years or so by posting it on my blog. The Moinillon blog, Moinillon means a little monk in French, a blog by a French-Russian monk of the Russian Diaspora Church, was a good model for me, and his generous help with technical problems was most welcomed at times. He was also very active in mentioning my blog on his, and this made it known to the Orthodox faithful. After I had used all the text that I had already at my disposal, I started looking for adequate material. What I wanted to put on my blog was anything that could be of use to isolated Orthodox brethren and sisters reading the French language. One thing is difficult to understand for Orthodox people in Orthodox countries. In Switzerland, France, and Belgium, apart from the first big cities, there are no Orthodox churches, and several faithful, whether they are cradle-born Orthodox or converts, are isolated without any possibility of attending church services or getting in touch with Orthodox people. By word of mouth, my first blog became well known. The fact that this first blog of mine provided an address where people could get in touch with me started to slightly change its aspects and its contents. People were asking for specific themes or topics they were interested in. Being conscious that the aim of the blog was not to satisfy my ego, but rather to serve in a modest way my community at large and isolated Orthodox people, I tried to abide by the numerous demands and wishes of my readers. I always had in mind a certain line for my blog. I wanted it to be traditional and to deal, but with an orthodoxy that would be the orthodoxy of the fathers and the elders of the church. Articles began to deal with lives of saints, sacraments and their explanations, testimonies of miracles, and practical tips on heavy subjects like confession and communion, and also the defense of the much slandered and persecuted Orthodox brethren in Kosovo, Ukraine, or the Middle East. From time to time, I was publishing translations of services and acathist or original ones I had written for Western saints. This part becoming important, I created a second blog devoted entirely to services, acathists, and also to troparia for the Western Orthodox saints before the Roman schism of 1054. And readers kept asking for services and acathists that they could not find in print or on the net. This gave me the incentive to do more work in that field, either translating or composing these. Thanks to this specific blog, an archimandrite in Belgium got in touch with me and asked whether I would be willing to write acathists for his monastery. He had relics of Western Orthodox saints and wanted to honor them with an acathist. I was indeed very moved by his proposal. I wrote back to him telling him that I accepted. He then sent me a list of about 30 saints for whom he wanted me to write an acathist. At the end of his message, he added, "Don't be scared by such a long list. It is not complete, and I will send you more names." And he did over the past 6 years. And he not only translated the acathist into the Dutch language, but he also published 3 volumes of these, 2 in Dutch and 1 in French. Then I came across a book on the lives of the Georgian saints, and since they were very little known in the French-speaking countries, I created a blog, and day after day I posted the lives of these saints, ending up with the whole Georgian synaxarion on this specific blog. From readers, I had requests concerning the Great Lent and what was to be done, sometimes with very precise demands, indicating an urgent need for answers and, of course, a need for recipes. I therefore created another blog with recipes from all over the Orthodox world. I started with recipes we had in my family, in my parish, and then I translated recipes from other sources, even getting permission from an Athonite website to use some of their texts. Then, seeing from the mails I received that there was a demand for commentaries of the Gospel, I translated Saint Theophan the Recluse thoughts for each day of the year and posted his thoughts on a blog dedicated to this purpose. Last but not least, having lots of requests about specific icons, and in particular icons of the Theotokos, I started, and it's still in the making, a blog with all the wonder-working icons of the Mother of God. What started 8 years ago as a challenge is now a full part of my life. I spend about 5 to 6 hours every day translating articles, answering questions from readers of my blogs, and sometimes questions being very difficult to answer because they are more for a priest or a confessor. I then direct these people to friends of mine who are priests. But most of the time, these questions are very basic questions, asked by people who became Orthodox and being isolated, far from any Orthodox community or church, they need to have answers in order to survive in a heterodox environment. I try as much as I can to give answers in the form of quotations from fathers or elders. Right from the beginning, I decided not to post readers' comments on my blogs. If they give me an email address, I replied to their comments, requests, or questions personally without posting them on the blog, unless they could be of use to people coming to read the blog. And this correspondence often is a time-consuming activity. If they write to the blog in an anonymous way, I don't answer, either on the blog or personally. From what I can see on other blogs, opening articles for comments very often starts a kind of tournament of comments that sometimes turns into a verbal war that is absolutely useless and very damaging, and it does not serve the cause of orthodoxy. Now, Orthodox friends sometimes contribute to the blog by sending translations of their own, mentioning articles from other blogs that should be posted on mine, or suggesting other themes or articles to be included. Readers of my blogs are not all Orthodox Christians. There are various other Christian denominations that consult it on a regular basis. Negative reactions are very few, but very offensive at times. They generally come from some Roman Catholic extremists who have but one argument: I'm a heretic and I should convert to the Latin Church. Other members of the same denomination, but obviously differently oriented, accuse me of not being in favor of ecumenism and urge me to join them in the general apostasy of our times. Other negative arguments come from fanatics for whom I'm a schismatic or heretic that should immediately join true or genuine orthodoxy, whatever that means. If these people with offensive comments have given a valid address, I write to them in a most specific way. In fact, the great majority of readers who contact me do so with requests for text, prayers, addresses, etc. Most of them are Orthodox Christians, but there are several Roman Catholics or Protestants, and sometimes Muslims, who come to the blog and get in touch with me to manifest in a civilized way their appreciation, their approval, polite rejection, or their questions about articles posted or about the Orthodox faith in general. After a few years of blogging, I got in touch with other blogs sharing the same values and the same approach, and this gave birth to fruitful exchanges and the creation of some kind of a network of traditional Orthodox blogs, mentioning the links of the other blogs of this network. My blogs are service blogs, as I call them. I try as much as I can to respond to a demand in order to serve the faithful of the Ark of Salvation, i.e. the Orthodox Church, always being on what Father Seraphim Rose of blessed memory called the royal path, avoiding the extremes on both sides. Thank you. Efradisto, spasiba.